And welcome to the special Shelburne Select Board meeting of Tuesday, January 15th, 2019, which I call to order. The next item on the agenda is to approve the agenda. I will propose a change in the agenda. That is that we cancel number 12, the executive session for appointment, employment, evaluation of a public officer employee, in the interest of time largely, and to reschedule that for likely our first meeting in February.
So moved as amended.
Moved as amended by Jamie.
Second.
Seconded by Mary. Any discussion?
Well, actually, the other recommendation, and again, in the interest of time and an insensitivity to current events, I was going to suggest postponing number 7 to the next meeting as well.
Well, the problem is there are a lot of people who came tonight to talk about it.
Just for that.
Yeah. I see Tom and Bill anyway, so I don't know if 2 constitutes a lot, but I imagine Lee is going to come as well shortly.
Lee is unable to come
Okay.
tonight. He had something come up.
Oh,
And how do you feel about that?
I'm going to suggest, Colleen, maybe we keep it as itemized and see what the discussion is and whether it should be continued.
it's allocated for 15 minutes.
Yeah. How about that? Is that okay? Sounds okay. Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, seeing no hands. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The next item is to approve Select Board meeting minutes of January 8, 19. I do have some immediate comments, and those relate to the spelling of Josh's name, which,
Well, you know,
on page number 8,
Yeah, there's a
Well, number
weird
2.
sentence.
Yeah,
and
so
it
that's-
repeats several times in the text, so my
Right.
suggestion is that it be vetted for correct spelling all the way through.
There's a
And-
there's a sentence in paragraph 8, if I might, that's all screwed up. Is that what you were
Right.
talking about?
The first paragraph.
Yeah, the last sentence. I think it should say, motion by Mary Kehoe to name Ian McRae as alternate, and that it carried unanimously.
I think that's right. That's my recollection as well. I think I seconded it.
Yeah.
Maybe. So we'll just have to clean that sentence
There's a
up.
little garble there.
Yes.
Yeah. In addition, there's a garble there, Lee.
But
Okay.
otherwise, that was it.
Are there any other corrections,
I didn't have any.
edits? Anything else? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve
So moved?
with those corrections?
Second.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The next item are public comments. Leading off will be Ruth, who will report on the new library town center project.
Hello. So, let's see here. Basically, work is ongoing. It's one of those times when a lot of what's happening is not, it's not real exciting to talk about, but it was kind of funny today. We're sitting there in the trailer freezing, and we talked about all the things they're doing to keep the buildings warm. As they put up the old windows, they're reinstalling the old windows in Town Hall, and as they do that, they've done all the regrouting and the reglazing, and now they're re-weather stripping everything. So those window seals should be tight, which would be great. That was a very drafty part of Town Hall. I don't know if you remember those windows. And then we also talked about how they build a roof on a net zero building, and how they start now with a real thin layer of, it's basically steel that they've laid down, and then they build up with layers of stacked insulation, and then they cover that with the membrane. So that's going to be interesting to see how much insulation goes into a net zero building. That's really all. If you have questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth.
Any questions of Ruth? Hearing none. Any other public comments? Hearing none, seeing no hands. The next item are select board comments. You want to lead it off, Colleen?
No. Thanks.
Jamie?
I don't have any
No
comments.
comment.
No comments.
No comment.
Mary?
None?
Josh?
Just a reminder about the reception on the 26th.
Yeah, that'll be a good time here.
2 to 4?
2 to 4.
2 to 4 here.
It's free.
And for what I gather, there's going to be a lovely selection of food and drink
Great. Did we put anything in the paper?
this week.
Good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other comments? Hearing none, the next item is the town manager report.
Thank you. Primary work product has been work on the budget, no surprise to you or anyone in the room or the viewing audience, and we'll be working through that again tonight. A lot of hard work onto that. Staff, certainly Peter in the background, providing essential background help.
Thank you, Lee. Any other comments, discussion? The next item are Ethics Committee Rules of Procedure, a presentation of which we're gratified the committee was willing to to extend its schedule of approval to involve us so that we could review it. And Tom Little, the vice chair, is here to lead that.
Thank you and good evening. The goal of the rules of procedure rewrite, I think were two: to align the rules of procedure with the new ordinance, which has some distinct differences from the old ordinance, and secondly, to make sure that the rules of procedure are not straying into areas that are properly reserved for the ordinance itself. In other words, not to expand, make sure they don't try to expand the jurisdiction or authority of the Ethics Committee, but stay within the guardrails, so to speak, of the ordinance. And those have been the driving goals of the committee's rewrite. And I'd be happy to, I haven't made a formal side-by-side, but I can go through and tell you some of the things that are different, if that would be of interest now, or I can do a formal side-by-side and file that with you, and you take a look at it.
I think it would be helpful for me. I'm not overly familiar with the current rules for just a high level.
Okay? Well, maybe I can.
I'd definitely like to see it side by side.
And I think you've got the proposed new rules of
Yes.
procedure with you. Okay, and I have that as well, and the current rules of procedure. And I'm going to not mention, I think, things that are immaterial or just purely editorial. So if you go to page 2 of the working draft of the revisions, under B, quasi-judicial hearings, there had been a procedure in the old ordinance for a person could choose to go first to the chair of the select board. And that was called filing of a concern. That's out of the ordinance. It was mentioned in the rules of procedure. It's out of the rules of procedure, or it's proposed to be out of the rules of procedure. Another change on the same page is that the old ordinance had, and the rules of procedure had contemplated that a person could file a complaint within 30 days of having discovered the problem or the matter of concern. I think the ordinance now moves that out to 60 days, and the rules of procedure would align with that. Most all of the cross references from the rules of procedure to the ordinance have changed because the ordinance was changed enough so that the the articles and the section numbers changed, so we had to make sure that the cross-references are consistent with that. On page 3 of the draft, you'll note, and under subsection C, we're now using the term in the rules because it's now in the ordinance of reasonable likelihood as opposed to probable cause. I think everyone agreed that probable cause was either too legalistic or had too much baggage with the law of probable cause to be helpful in an ethics ordinance. This also provides that when the chair of the ethics committee is calling a meeting of the committee to do its reasonable likelihood investigation, that's no later than 15 days from the filing of the complaint to keep things moving. Later on in C, echoing the ordinance, the preliminary investigation now may include interviews with the person who filed the complaint, the person against whom the complaint is filed, or both in a closed session. And I should step back here. One of the things that, as a matter of organization of the rules that the committee decided years ago when writing the first version was that the rules should repeat or reflect a lot of what's also in the ordinance, so that if people could go to one place and get both the procedural stuff and also see something about what the ordinance requires, that would be helpful as opposed to having to go back and forth.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because a lot of this tracks what's in the current ordinance. Is it just for convenience?
That's it.
Okay.
And we could have done it otherwise.
Yeah, but the idea is that this is really for committee members,
Right.
Right.
And for people
it's
who have
for
to prepare for a
applicants.
hearing.
And for,
Complainants,
right.
Under C2, now the chair, if the committee finds no reasonable likelihood under the old ordinance, the person against whom the complaint was filed never was given any notice that a complaint had ever been filed. It was sealed. The person who filed the complaint was told that no probable cause was found, but the person against whom it was filed was not notified. This, and I believe this is in the ordinance as well, that the respondent is informed that a violation was made but not claimed, rather, but not found, and that a copy of the complaint can be viewed by the respondent in the clerk's office.
Tom, can I
Yes.
ask, one thing I couldn't find in the rule, and it could just be that I only got my materials today, having been stuck in snowy Washington, D.C. for the weekend, that I didn't see where the respondent is ever formally served with a copy of a complaint. I believe that was omitted from the substantive rule. I'm sure it's in here, I just couldn't find it. But I do recall we talked about that with
I do
respect
recall
to the substantive rule, and decided that it would have to be somewhere in the rules of procedure.
So is that the first sentence in C? Upon receipt, they'll send
No.
confidential copies to just to the committee members.
And the
I
complainant.
think you were in C3. If a reasonable likelihood is found, the clerk informs the respondent and the complainant of that. Notify them where they can get a copy of it and set the matter for a public hearing as soon as possible. I think that the new ordinance, though, it does have more stuff on, does it not have more stuff on
I don't think so.
service?
Only because I recall that we took that matter up at the final hearing. Lee was here. I can't recall, Tom, if you were here. I gotta find it.
Yeah, 'cause we had a discussion about forms of service, I remember.
For me, I think it's odd
Once-
that you
once
would
it's
get
found-
it. yeah.
Once reasonable likelihood is found, or
Yeah.
regardless?
Well, I don't really,
I can't recall the.
I can't recall either, but
Yeah.
I think, I was gonna say, Jamie, I think it's odd that you could be the respondent of a complaint, and then you get a call or a note from Lee or someone that says, guess what, good news, there was no reasonable likelihood found about the complaint against you. And to me, that's odd. It's just
Yes.
kind of a,
It does feel odd.
I don't have the ordinance in front of me, so it's hard to.
yeah, I'm trying to find it.
In the old ordinance, it recites a personal notice, once probable cause was found, personal notice shall be given, among other things, to the complainant and to the respondent. And notice of the hearing shall be posted in accordance with the open meeting law. I don't have a hard copy in front of me of the new ordinance.
I have an electronic copy, and I'm just putting in respondent on a find function. And
It's in section, over on page 4 of the revised rules of procedure under 2A. The clerk provides personal notice and a copy of the complaint in accordance with Article 11C3C to the complainant and to the respondent.
Once a hearing scheduled.
Right, right, I just wanted to follow up on that piece, and then, there's in 2 sub B, it talks about how the clerk can go about doing that,
So-
but you're addressing whether the respondent should be given notice of the complaint
Right.
prior, in all cases,
initiation.
prior to determining of reasonable likelihood?
particularly because I'm reading the rule, I'm sorry I don't have a paper copy. That's why, by the way, I always have this thing up, the computer up, because most of my stuff is stored here, so it gives me easy access. C3 of the ordinance says, upon receipt of a complaint regarding a public official, the Ethics Committee shall undertake a confidential preliminary inquiry of the complaint in a closed deliberative session to determine if there is a reasonable likelihood to believe that a violation has occurred. The Ethics Committee may separately interview the complainant or the respondent or both under oath in a closed session. There's nothing in the rule substantively that says when the respondent gets notice of that. And
You mean in the ordinance?
I mean, in the ordinance, sorry.
Okay.
And it makes it even more odd, Tom, because I can imagine sitting there and getting a call from Lee saying, hey, I'd like to interview you to see if there's reasonable likelihood that
Well,
a
hopefully
violation occurred.
Hopefully the conversation would start with, I'm calling to notify you that.
Yeah,
you've
but there's
been the
nothing in the
subject of-"
rule that says that, and I think
Maybe that's something you
the
can massage in
respondent
the.
deserves to at least have some, I don't know, 15 days prior notice?
And wouldn't that be the opportunity to say, you had this complaint, and also go to the complainant and say, we talked to the respondent, and they were not aware of this? Or that would be, to me, an opportunity for mediation there, before it ever
Resolve.
got to a closed deliberative session to determine whether there's, reasonable likelihood. Because to me,
Precisely.
a closed deliberative session that results in that finding, to me, means almost like a prejudgment. There's reasonable likelihood that this already happened. And then you just have an open hearing to confirm it.
Probable cause or reasonable likelihood process was designed as a screen to screen out things that should not be brought to a public hearing.
Right.
And I think it would certainly be possible to revise the rule of procedure to provide a little more detail around how the chair goes about notifying the respondent and how much time is given and how that process goes. I think the sense was that you wouldn't require the respondent to be interviewed in all cases if you had a case where the complaint on the face of it was so thin or so clearly not alleging a violation that you wouldn't go to the process of bringing the respondent in those situations, or at least leave that to the discretion of the
Yes,
of the
I
committee.
understand that that was probably the motivation, but I don't know. I think there might be cases, as Colleen has just said, where there's a misunderstanding or perhaps some, I don't know, other motive for the complaint. Anyway, I just think when somebody's making a formalized complaint against a town official, that the town official should be entitled to know about it as soon as reasonably possible.
That's provided for, though, because the committee members can interview as part of their determination.
Yeah,
They
but
can
there's
have
no
a discussion.
formalized process for a person who's being accused of wrongdoing to know about it.
Yeah, there's a process that already entails them without them even knowing
Correct.
anything about it.
If
And
no
then there
interview
was,
is held,
Yeah.
then the
I mean, that's-
notification follows
Or no
the
timing.
decision.
No timing for the notification, even if there is an interview held. I wouldn't want to get that phone call at work
but I think that,
before knowing about it.
right. But then there's something else that you mentioned about it was in the old ordinance, something called the filing of concern, and it was going to the chair of the select board, and which was really kind of an opportunity for the chair of the select board to say, well, okay, is this something that can be worked out before it went to the ethics committee? So it was kind of like that pre-screening opportunity there.
Right, and that was voluntary on the part of the person who believed they had identified an ethical issue. That person could
They
either
could approach
They
the
could
could
chair.
go to the
Chair.
chair of the select board
Right.
or not. And in the,
More advisory.
for whatever it's worth, in the 2 years we've been doing this, no one has ever, at least to our knowledge, we don't get reports from the select board chairs of whether that's happened or not. We're not aware of anyone having gone that route.
And I know of 2 instances
Okay.
in which someone approached the chair of the select board, and the chair of the select board was able to give advice or attempt a mediation.
So we can take, and perhaps if the select board or one or more members can maybe share with us an articulation, something in writing about exactly where you are on that issue, so we're not.
I think we did that, though, Tom.
Misperceiving.
I'm going to look up the
Okay.
minutes. I think it's probably in the minutes of
Okay.
the meeting that we had.
Yeah, I think our sense would be that unless it contravenes the ordinance, which would mean a different problem, the desirability is for notice at the earliest stage,
But do you
rather
want,
than upon
do you
determination.
want notice to the respondent in all cases upon the filing of a complaint?
Right, I don't
Yes.
think we did that. Is that, Mary, does the ordinance provide for that, though? That's what, I think we have to
No.
check that. I don't know, I don't recall.
No, the ordinance doesn't
Yeah.
provide for a formalized timing for notifying the respondent that a complaint has been filed. It's implied, certainly, if a reasonable likelihood has been found, that the clerk will give the respondent the complaint, but then it says, and schedule a hearing, within 15 days, I think, right? So, to me, that by itself is problematic, because you're giving somebody such a short period of time to prepare for a hearing when conceivably the complaint is filed, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks prior to that, and people are looking at it and doing some level of investigation, then finally determine, oh yes, here's a reasonable possibility of a violation, and now the respondent gets 2 weeks to collect him or herself. and
It's
try to
the-
figure it out.
yeah.
And Tom, I would add, as we recently saw in this kind of setting, you have someone who's being accused of wrongdoing, who's sitting in this room at a table trying to defend himself without an attorney, not even understanding that he had the right to call witnesses.
I would just caution us, we have committee members, it's still an open, right?
It
It's
was-
still an open
It's an
matter.
open matter.
And we have
but
committee
this is
members
some-
sitting here who need to deliberate.
Everybody was there to see it. It was
Understood,
a
I
public
just- yeah.
matter.
This is one of the reasons that I thought it would be a good idea to delay this until the next meeting.
I'm just talking about a hearing. I'm not talking about anything in particular and the process that unfolded.
The
And we also have to keep in mind, like, that this respondent isn't, a criminal. These are our neighbors and our fellow citizens, and they're volunteers serving on committees and who may not have had any idea. I just feel like this is still not quite the right.
So could we, Tom, could we just add in the first sentence in B1C, the clerk shall inform the chair and add the respondent to that?
Are you looking at the ordinance now?
No, I'm looking at the
No,
rules. If we
rule.
just added,
After committee members and the respondent.
I'm sorry, which,
B1C.
B1C?
B1C, first sentence. Upon receipt of the complaint, send confidential copies to both committee members and the respondent. Would that alleviate some of the
I
Yeah.
think
due
that might be a
process
change. that
concerns?
you
It
have
is
to
a
make
bit of
to-
a change.
I think the question was, does that need to be in the ordinance?
I don't love it, but it's hard, right? There's things in here that probably should be in the ordinance that you have to read both together. That's what I find. I think you can't just read this in isolation without the ordinance.
So should just make note of that for now and then
Yeah,
as
I
a
think that's
suggestion, and then we'll keep moving on to the rest
I
of
think that's a good
it.
idea, Colleen. You want to step our way through the rest of it, Tom, and
Sure.
see?
There's a mention of mediation on page 4, but I note that at least the drafting glitch, I think we resolved that in the committee, but it doesn't reflect that here on whether to require that if there's going to be mediation, that the mediator be functioning on a volunteer basis. Is that in your
No.
draft? Okay, then that's been taken out. I'm just looking. We're making it clear over on the next page that the chair of the committee during the hearing can examine witnesses and help if people, particularly if people are there without attorneys, as likely will be the case, is to help with the sort of procuring the testimony to make sure that all sides are given a fair opportunity to testify. The next page, and under 10, there's a proviso that the committee will issue a written decision within 15 days. And I think that's,
Is that different? How is that number 10 different?
I don't think there was a deadline.
Okay.
That was helpful. Thanks,
So it
Tom.
would be, I know the committee would be happy to come back. This is very tricky, detailed stuff, and it's, caution has to be taken when you're making changes to it, and then when you're making changes to the changes.
Right.
Right. Well, I think the first issue, Tom, is whether this suggestion contravenes the ordinance, so we know what the scope is.
So why don't we all think about that
Yeah.
and see what we come up with.
I can shed a little light right now. I have the meeting minutes, which say that members of the Ethics Committee were in attendance. There was discussion of minor edits to Article 11C3. 11C3C, and agreement to move this section to the rules of procedure. And that's the section 11C3C is upon finding of a reasonable likelihood that a violation occurred, the clerk shall set a date for a hearing as soon as possible, taking into consideration scheduling, hearing preparation needs of the complainant and the respondent. Written notice shall be given to each member of the ethics committee of the complaint, and so on. And then, so that is the section that I think we said, all right, well, that should really go in the rules of procedure. Lee was there, but my recollection is it also included the timing of notice to the respondent. It's been a problem I've had with the ordinance all along, that there's no specific timing for notice to the respondent of when the respondent should receive the complaint. And I think it needs to be addressed either in the ordinance or in the rule. And I approved, my vote to approve the ordinance was premised on the notion that there would be something in the rule that would specifically say precisely when a respondent would formally receive the complaint.
And just to be clear, is it your preference that in the rule of procedure that in every case upon the filing of a complaint that the respondent be given a copy, either notwithstanding that the committee may not find reasonable likelihood?
No,
Okay.
I don't think that's necessary. I do think, I just think there needs to be something in the rule that specifically spells out when a respondent gets a copy of the complaint. Right now, there's nothing in the ordinance or the rule that says that. And I'm particularly troubled, as I said before, and I won't belabor it, that the way it reads now, one can only infer that the respondent would get the complaint about 15 days prior to the hearing.
Well, 15 days is from the filing of a complaint to the reasonable likelihood meeting is 15 days.
Oh, I'm sorry, when
From
does the
reasonable,
clerk-
finding a reasonable likelihood to the hearing is 30 days, I think.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry,
Okay.
okay.
But in
Okay,
any
good.
case, it's a question of equity.
30,
right?
well, yeah.
We'll go back to the drafting table on that and come up with something that we think will work.
There's a typo on page 4 under 5, Tom. Fourth sentence down, the vice chair shall preside. Are there any other questions for Tom?
I have one, just because it's been brought up before with regard to the whole funding issue. In the ordinance, it states that the committee can ask for funding. Has it been considered, or do you think it's important that there be a mechanism, or at least a procedure in these rules for what would constitute a need for asking for funds for outside counsel, and what would be to put it in writing as to what that procedure would be?
Is it a chair request, or is it a vote of the body, or is that what you're, yeah?
Yeah. And whether there needs to be a some kind of framework for how that would happen, or what would engage that process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion, any other? We thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thanks,
as well,
Tom, for
Bill,
all your
Gwen.
hard work.
No, we thank you very much for the,
I'm sure that this will be finished at some point.
We're going to get it right.
thank you. The next item is Town Plan Chapter Summaries. Josh has provided us with a copy this evening of his reviews, those being in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Do you want to step through it, or?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. And in some ways, it's actually, I think, beneficial that we're doing this after we've gone through the others, because I think it does set the stage for, it sort of ties a lot of the other things that we discussed last week in, and shows that the integration in this, other than these two chapters, are also the longest of the comprehensive plan. So getting it down to a summary form may not be as complete as some might like, but I think I can start by with the chapter 1, which is the land use part of this. And the issue here, I think, is a good defining principle of placemaking, which is the way that the framework in this has been put together and defined as the process of creating quality places where people want to live, work, play, and learn. And so it's a sort of an aspirational, this is where we're trying to get to. And so I think that was a good way of defining or of setting this out. And that idea of placemaking relates to the important town features and how they will, like the village center, neighborhoods, historical structures, viewscapes, and natural resources. And then the land use, as has had in the past, is divided into growth areas within the village center and outside the village center, and then rural areas. And then there are other distinctions underneath that, but those are the big areas of trying to come up with recommendations for land use in each of those areas. And the actions that are being suggested to taken there, and I think this is a significant difference between the other plan, is that it really is suggesting that collaboration amongst the CBCs is really important, and part of that is to inventory and map features in the town so that these resources can be more effectively used in the planning and decision-making process. That, again, it's going out and saying, okay, what do we have that is important that we need to preserve? And so working on that, and I know a lot of the committees, that's a big part of what they do, and making that an integrative function will probably be very helpful. The other part, again, is the sort of the active participation of the CBCs in site visits to any potential development site, as well as creating, or at least changing the way it's perceived or presented, so there's more details and more visualization materials about any development concept to make it easier for people to understand what's actually going on. Sometimes some of the proposals are pretty dense, and I think there's a suggestion that this needs to be more accessible. And where this leads to is that the zoning bylaws and subdivision standards and sort of any other part of the town guidelines that focus really need to be reviewed and make sure that they are consistent with the town plan recommendations, to make sure that both they're easy to understand and they can be effectively used in the review process, and that everything is compatible with the vision and the objectives of the plan. And then sort of what I perceived in this, in that land use, is that if you think of the term conservation in the broader sense of what are we trying to accomplish, and I think conservation sort of fits in to a lot of places across the whole plan, not just in land use, is that there are features of the town we want to conserve. And if we look at it in that broad sense, then that's going to be something that will enhance the whole placemaking process. And so it's more of a conceptual, what do we want to do? And by and large, there seems to be a thread running through that the conservation in general of land structures, connectivity, all fit into this. Those are, incorporated and illustrated in the recommendations in that chapter. And that then segues quite well into the next chapter on natural and scenic resources and land conservation, at which provides more details into that, or at least how to apply some of the things that are described in the land use section. But it's also emphasizing similar approaches to achieving the planned goals. So some of these salient points, and obviously I've generalized and hopefully I've put together them, that along with the Chapter 1 recommendations is this review of the bylaws, zoning bylaws, and regulations to incorporate these natural resources, the natural resources and conservation imperatives which are described in the plan. And this is really important from the perspective of giving the tools from the Planning Commission to the DRB to be able to really understand the town plan says this, okay, and how do the regulations that we put in place give the both the committees, all the committees, the ability to take what's in the plan, put in the regulations, and make it implementable by, or at least reviewable by the DRB per se, to make sure that we actually are moving towards those goals as stated in the plan. So that's going to be a big job in a lot of ways, and I think the Planning Commission is probably going to have to do a lot to make sure that happens. Another thing that's really, and again, fits through a lot of this is expanding and improving mapping resources, and so that they can be used throughout the process, both just sort of understanding what the town has, where things are, both for use by the committees and use by the public, of understanding how, where everything is and where the important features. Certainly, we've done a lot of good mapping, and this has to be continued and enhanced. Another, I think, important aspect of this, which is, I think, has been done on a sort of a ad hoc basis, but I think in general, that for any potential development process, a site visit needs to occur, and by the Natural Resources Committee, and that any assessment and recommendations of that committee should be a key factor in the decision making. And in some ways, this is not that unsimilar to the effect of the Historical Preservation Committee, making sure that they're not necessarily just guidance, that they really have some meat to them, in that we feel that those people have done that assessment, knowing most about the natural resources implications of any project, and that if any expert opinion is needed or requested, that opinion or that professional would be someone authorized by the town and not necessarily by the developer. One very important part is that the whole planning process, we're trying to encourage protection of large-scale features. Often, when you talk about individual parcels that or areas for development, you get focused on that small thing, but it's really important to understand how it fits into the larger ecosystem part of that area. And so these features, we want to try to keep development away from impacting this significant natural resource areas such as forest, wildlife habitat, corridors, through that. So that big picture look is an important policy idea within the plan. And since we are going to enter the phase of dealing with stormwater, there's suggestions that it's really important to take stormwater regulations down to a fairly low level. A suggestion is sort of parcels greater than a quarter of an acre, but really make requirements that any development really, both on a sort of development-wide basis, but also on an individual parcel basis, use low-impact development features that and best practice mitigation techniques for dealing with runoff and stormwater to limit any kind of degradation that might occur. And then another important part of this and a whole section is trying to support our existing agricultural community and to support and value this diverse area and to make sure that it is encouraged, but also to put features in place that limit any negative impact both on the neighbors and water and soil resources of agriculture. And then lastly is to rename the Open Space Fund to the Conservation Fund and continue the financial contributions to the fund's effectiveness as we discussed last week, and continue those contributions and collaborations with other organizations to continue to conserve the habitats and the resources that we have and develop appropriate management plans. But again, this also was stated last week in that the enormous amount of work that's been put into the comprehensive plan is quite significant, but the plan as a number of sheets of paper really isn't going to get us anywhere unless there is there's a mechanism for both prioritization and implementation of these the recommendations throughout the plan. So yes, it's great to have a plan, and there's legal requirements for us to have the plan, and plans just do that. That's what we're thinking we need to do, but there has to be a mechanism to take what's in the plan and assign it to whatever committees or groups that need to work on it, and come up with some kind of schedule for implementing these recommendations, or else it just sits there. That's what I got.
Thank you, Josh. Any comments? Any discussion? Any comments from the public? The next item, thanks, Josh. The next item is to receive proposed zoning amendments and warn a public hearing for February 12th.
So recently, the Planning Commission had submitted to us several proposed amendments. We already slated a hearing on those for February 12. We now have another late-breaking proposal. We have time to wrap that into a consolidated hearing. It's a singular proposal related to small expansions of non-conforming buildings. my recommendation is that we accept it and warn that one as well for a hearing on February 12th with the other proposals.
Do we have to do that by motion?
Yeah.
That would be great.
So moved.
Moved by Mary,
Second.
seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Lee. The next is to open a public hearing into the proposed town budget for fiscal year 2019-2020, which will include an update overview of the proposed school budget for those same fiscal years.
Dave's here.
Is Dave? Ah, okay.
Snuck in.
Why don't we start, we have to motion and
You can
Doing it-
open the hearing.
to open the public hearing. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Josh moves.
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Why don't we begin with you, Dave?
Yeah, just bring it up over here. I can speak with a microphone from over here, I guess. Thanks, Josh. I'll try to, can I pick this up or?
Yeah, you can. Just pull it.
Ah, there it is.
Oh, he says, well, it's up to you.
It's not a big deal if I do it this way, is it, or? Okay, all right. I'll just turn this way so I can talk to the crowd as well as to the board. Thanks for having me. Let me try to get this out of here.
Yeah. Doesn't like to go away.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh, well, sorry about that. So my name is Dave Connery. I'm a member of the Champlain Valley School District Board, and I'm going to just give a brief presentation about the budget process we went through and what our final budget is. We're going to go through the mission statement, talk about our volunteers that helped us, talk about Shelburne's community school and specifics, talk about enrollment, the budget, and then go through the draft articles and get some questions. So, if you could see this, as you listen to this and you get any questions while I'm talking and you go home, there's a spot on our website, which is cvsdvt.org, which stands for Champlain Valley School District, VT. There's a link on there that you can click on that goes, when you click on that, you can send an email to the chair of the board, which is Lynn Jonick, and she's a Charlotte resident. But if you have questions or any comments, if that come up afterward, feel free to use that. I always throw in our mission statement, and I know folks that have worked in big companies and gone through ISO audits, we create mission statements to check a box, and they hang on the wall in the cafeteria, and then we never really use them. I feel in our school district, this mission statement really points to how education has truly changed from when I was younger, and definitely from when Jamie was younger. So Jamie and I used to work together, so I had to get one shot in there.
There'll be more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's learning actively and collaboratively, thinking creatively and critically, living responsibly and respectfully, contributing positively to the community, and pursuing excellence. Nothing in here explicitly states you're going to learn the alphabet, go through 17 critical spelling words a day, and memorize the multiplication tables. Those are all things that are assumed. But kids are going to be faced with problems to solve in class that are going to represent the challenges that they have in life coming towards them. You know, not just doing multiplication tables, but getting a piece of string and figuring out the maximum area that they can include within that string and come up with some sort of relationship as to why that happened. Things like that. I have two kids that are in Shelburne Community School, and it's fun to watch their curriculum change over the past 9 years, and the problems that they have to solve, and they're definitely different than the things I solved when I was younger. So part of our process does not just include the board when we're developing the budget. We actively include administrators. We have teachers at our hearings. And then we also have what we used to call budget buddies, but they have another name now. I can't remember what it is. But basically, we seek out members of the community to come to the budget process and ask questions and participate. In this case, Shelburne's was Kate Cross, who's an elementary parent. Our one part here is not only did we have 4 meetings to go through the different parts of the budget throughout December and into January. We have our final meeting next Tuesday, but we had a budget forum at CVU back in October, where we had an overall presentation of the school, and then everyone broke out by town to speak with their principals and get a presentation from each principal. So not only is it a budget process in November and January, but now that we are a consolidated district, we have year-round budgeting where we pass a budget in March, we review, reflect, and improve upon that budget. May to September, we're setting goals, reviewing our strategic model. We have a school board retreat in June where we really work on those goals and refine them. And then we go into our budget season, which is November and January. November to January. Points of pride from Shelburne Community School. I didn't make this chart, but certainly being a cross-country runner, I was really excited to see that number 1 was that we were the Vermont State champions in girls cross-country. Lots of great work from teachers, working for COTS, this global goals work that Shannon Baird has been working on with Sharon Davidson. Development of monthly conversations about digital citizenship. This is really important for kids. That's basically how to behave when you're online and in the internet, and be an adult, because this is a tool that is completely new to these kids, and it can be a great asset and it can be a great liability. So it's important for them to work through that. A great program before school for any child to come in and get some physical activity before they, and breakfast before they go into school. And then continuing work on our diversity and inclusion work groups, which is important in our school. So as we went into the budget, we had a few assumptions. We had salary assumptions based on growth. We're in negotiations with the teachers union right now. We estimated that benefits for health insurance specifically would go up by almost 11%. Utilities and fuel were also going to increase. Tech center tuition was going up by 5%. Unemployment insurance was going up by 5%, and then also the cost of our substitutes was going to go up as well. The first meeting that we had as a group was to go through our special education service, our special education delivery, and thus the service plan that goes with that. I don't remember specifically which act it was, but 4 or 5 years ago, before we consolidated the district, all special education was consolidated at central office. So there's no longer a special education program at each individual school. It's all run out of a central office here at the central office, which is up on the 3rd floor. If you look at the history, it's gone up and down with a significant change 2 years ago, and then a steady yet also significant change over the last 2 years. This is due to the fact that the population of kids requiring special education changes on a yearly basis. The big components of the change were benefits to that staff that were employed, and then also tuition for programs for kids that needed special assistance, and it was a program that we didn't specifically have in the school, and so the kids were tuitioned out to get that assistance in other programs. This is a bummer, but can't remember the number specifically. I guess if I did this, I could do. No, that's not going to work. But there was a small increase in the budget for this year, but it's more than 65,000. But I can't remember from what it is here. But I apologize. I can't seem to get it to show. You know what? I could minimize it and then I would see it. There we go. So it's an increase of about $500,000 for this year. And the special education director has done a ton of good work at looking at efficient ways to deliver that work as well. And now it won't. Okay, there we go. So moving on to general education, a lot of this is driven by the population of kids that are in the school and most critical class size ratios. If you look at the averages in the first column here, these are the average class size across all schools, specifically for kindergarten, which is critical for our young learners, and then it's broken out by K-3 and 4-8. You can see the range is, I would say, is pretty tight, for each one of these, and each one is close to the policy goal, which is 20 for kindergarten and K-3, and it's well below, I would say, for 4-8. What you can't see here for the CVU aspect is there isn't necessarily a class size requirement for CVU. It's more about overall teacher load, which is keeping the teachers below 100 students in their total census, and then keeping with the average class size still at about 22 at the max. It's still pretty good. Let's see. The big personnel changes that you will see are a reduction in K-1 class sizes in all schools except for Williston. And I think if you go into Williston and you see all the building that's going on in Williston relative to the other 4 towns, you can see where that is. I think the kindergarten classes in Williston the number of classes is up, and they are the school that has the 19 kids per class. So in the other schools, all those classes are down in the younger ages. Also, we had an addition of a school resource officer, which I understand you guys approved today. Is that, or you are going to approve?
Well, we've been talking about it for a while. We now have a contract that all the parties have agreed to. We haven't brought it formally back here for authorization, but we're on track for that.
Okay, that's great. Somebody told me it was on the agenda today. I didn't see it, but I just wanted to double check. School resource officer, we're the largest first or second school district from population size in the state, and we're the only district in the state that up until now did not have a school resource officer, which is someone in the high school and to a lesser degree in the contributing schools, the elementary and middle schools, that provides assistance to kids that need a little bit of direction and correction, and also providing security to the school. This was probably the biggest issue of last year, and there was no topic in my time as chair for 3 years where I received more emails than about adding a school resource officer after what happened in Broward County last year. So I'm really glad that we are adding this person, and I'm really happy that the town and the police union and the police department and the school were able to work through that. It's another great example of cooperation between lots of municipal organizations. Moving on to other ads, adding a librarian aide and then also increasing FTE positions at CVU. The RISE program is a alternative project-based learning program that they have at school. Adding social studies, adding math, decreasing a world language section, and then there's another 0.3 FTE that needs to come out of the budget. One of the things that we did when we were going through the general education work was we were presented with all the schools' ratios of students to teacher and then the number of sections. And in CVU, it was the number of students and the number of sections per subject. And the numbers that were presented for social studies were shocking at the size of the classes. And even though a lot of those are discussion style classes, where a larger class size lends itself to a good discussion, we felt that those were still just a little bit too large. And so I'm glad to see that this is being added as well. Also, there's an increased amount of healthcare related claims and benefit support required at central office, and so we're adding a central office person as well. Just a halftime. Highlights of operations would be, I'm going to talk specifically about facilities later when we get to that article, but we have increases in utilities and fuel costs across all the facilities. We have also done a lot of construction, and we've offset any of those expenses with some really efficient construction use. Williston has completed their project. Shelburne has completed their whole project. It's finally done. The AB and the DE and the C wings are all completed. I thank the Shelburne voters for approving that and everyone in the district for helping to pay for it. If you haven't been in the school, you should make an appointment with Mr. Sevo and go check it out. It's really amazing. We are seeing continued savings from consolidation, where especially for facilities, we have an overall facilities director and then reduced staff at each one of the buildings. And we don't have a lot of duplication and 5 different people planning work in each individual building. We have one person planning the work for all the buildings. Transportation, fuel costs are up, but we did have a cost reduction because we no longer are contracting out Charlotte Transportation. That was a relic from when we weren't consolidated, and we've brought that in-house and using our own buses. Food service has always been shown as a loss because there's a certain amount of subsidy that happens. I think after many years of seeing that loss, we realized that we just weren't subsidizing it enough to make it affordable for kids and for teachers. So we've increased the amount of money we're spending on food service. And then also technology. We're doing a lot of work on security and privacy initiatives and really trying to streamline apps and software that teachers and kids are using to make sure that personal information isn't getting out to third parties. If you ever get a request to do a sign up or any sort of software or sharing aspect for your kid's class, I would encourage you to read the terms and conditions and make sure that they're not protecting your kid's info and then in turn selling the parents' info because you want to log on and see the stuff. So that's the big problem we have. Another thing is we are buying fewer computers this year. We would love to buy more. However, there are tariffs that could be coming that would be increasing the price of those by 25%. And so we have cut back on buying those in anticipation of those tariffs. If you look at enrollment, of course, the final. Enrollment has gone up and down. Specifically at SCS for this next year, it's going to be going down by 1.7%. Not a huge number. That's always subject to, there's always kindergartners that arrive, and there's always first graders that arrive. There's folks that go to private kindergartens or other kindergartens, and then the kids come in first grade. So there's always some flux. As you can see, we're down 12 students this year. For CVSD as a whole, you can see that it's come down about 200 students over the past 8 years. And similar to SCS, overall CVSD enrollment is coming down 1.6%. So we go through all of the inputs that I talked about in the previous slides, and our budget comes out to be this $78,901,000 number, which is a net increase of 2.7%, and our equalized cost per pupil is $16,129, where that cost per equalized pupil has gone up 2.4%. This last line here is a typo. It's $2,063,000, not 2.6 million. The 6 and the 0 were transposed. But you can see the components of the 2 million increase are salary and benefits of our teachers and staff, special ed increases, operations increases, offset by 300,000 of consolidation savings. One part of the budget, and that's a great part of consolidation, is that we're able to create a solid strategic plan, and we're continuing to add information to this. What you see here is the strategic plan as put forth in September when we started, and the numbers for the final budgets aren't what you saw on the previous page, but these give us some real solid boxes to look at expenses as we go forward, and then from year to year to refine the model and not start from scratch every November when we're trying to develop a new budget. We can look at a steady drawing down of our fund balance from 3 million down to 1 million, and using that money to pay for facilities upgrades and then offset the tax rate, and then also just sort of looking at trying to get overall spending down from the 2.7, 2.3, and then in the further years go out to a 1.7% increase. And these are the general boxes that we're trying to get expenses into to get on that path. Back in the fall, the tax commissioner releases a letter and basically gives schools guidelines for, this is the amount of revenue you have, and these are the spending trends that we want to see. The governor in the past 2 years has always surprised us in March after we voted on our budget with something like this, so hopefully that won't happen for the 3rd year in a row. But the state anticipated that growth in ed spending was going to go up 3.3%, and ours was held to 2.7%. Equalized pupil count, they anticipated that it was going to go down almost, or a little over 0.75%. Our equalized pupil count has stayed very close to 0 from a change standpoint. Equalized pupils are a little bit different from the actual number of students that are in the school, and that's because it costs more expensive. It's more expensive to educate a high schooler than it is to educate an elementary schooler. So equalized pupils numbers weren't in this presentation, but and I apologize for that, but that's what that number is. Growth in spending per equalized pupil, so that's the 16,125 number that I presented on the previous page. The state anticipated that they could handle that going up by 4.1%. We held that to 2.4%. So to beat the state average in Chittenden County, where expenses are highest, we feel pretty good about that. So final bit of the budget here is how does all this roll up into tax rate? And all of these numbers come into an equalized homestead tax rate for the entire district of 1.5 of $1.51 per $100 of assessed value. We have an incentive from consolidation of 6 cents on that because we're in the third year, so it's gone from 10 to 8 to 6. That brings our equalized tax rate to $1.45, which is lower than last year by a penny equalized. And then we go to the next page where we talk about how CLA is put into that. CLA for Shelburne, our CLA decreased favorably, I would say, such that our tax rate is only going up by 0.2%, which this is an increase of $2.93 per 100,000 of assessed value. It's unfortunate it is an increase, but I think it's a pretty reasonable increase based on all the other pressures on our budget. So the articles that you're going to vote on town meeting day, the first article, Article 7, is for the budget. Do you approve of a budget of $78,901,000? And it's also going to include that 16,129 number per student. The second article is two things, which is applying the fund balance to the budget to reduce the tax rate. And then also, you saw that we had a fund balance of about $3 million 2 years or last year. And our auditors tell us that that is too much and we need to do that. So we split some of that into going into the budget over the next 3 years to reduce the tax rate, as well as taking $1 million out of that and applying it to the construction fund to do what everyone asked us to do when we were asking to improve Shelburne Community School, which is to get involved in preventive maintenance. And I think that's one of the greatest things of consolidation, is that we can pool all of this money and really prioritize and attack building maintenance. And you can see there's the spread of, on this first column, the spread of projects that need to be done. Allenbrook School on the first column, you know, the first few rows. There's a lot of work at Charlotte Community School that needs work, CVU, Heinsberg, and then a few projects allocated to Shelburne for sidewalk replacement. If anybody's tripped around the front of the school, they know what that's like. And then also replacing the folding wall in the main gym. So this second article, Article 9, which would be the three things I just said: applying $500,000 to the budget from the fund balance, $1 million to the construction fund, and then leaving us with a balance of 1.828 to apply, 1.828 million to apply in future years. And then always the best budget. These must be numbered wrong because we just had 2 Article 9s. We're buying 5 buses this year for the whole district. We used to buy approximately 2 a year in Shelburne, so it's about average. And then again, please vote on March 5th. And I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them at this time.
Thank you, Dave.
Wow.
Questions from any of us?
I've got a question. As far as the reducing your fund balance and your guys' ability to keep the percent increase to 2.4%, did any of that fund balance help with that, or is it really just being used just for business maintenance and not for just running of the school?
No, so 500,000 of that was applied to the budget, and that reduced the actual budget. And then $1 million was applied to the construction fund. So I think that's what you're asking. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. The fund balance is tough because whatever you apply in one year and then you don't have the ability to apply the next year, then that looks like a tax or a budget increase because you've decreased the amount that you can contribute. So you have, as we're trying to tail off the, decrease the balance, we're trying to do that gradually over, you can see 4 years, so we don't see that on a, that easily preventable spike that does nothing but concern voters. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions from the public? Any comments? Hearing none? Just a real quick one, Dave.
Yes.
Of the million that's proposed for expenditure on facilities, is that booked entirely by individual projects, or are you going to retain something in reserve for unanticipated?
So the answer is yes. There is the list of projects that I presented right there. And then there is going to be a balance for unexpected projects. There's also going to be a more regular request to do bonding, and that's to prevent $19 million and $11 million bonds every 20 years and keep it as, lower numbers like $3 to $5 million more often as required. I will say that while the Williston Central School has just been renovated and Shelburne has been renovated, it appears that an audit that was done recently for Charlotte shows that their school is in need of a lot of maintenance. So there will be more ask from a bond aspect over the entire district to do maintenance. But you could see in that list that there's a lot of small projects that are laid out that are all less than $100,000, but they add up. And in addition, there's also a 3- and 5-year plan for what the long term is for operations and maintenance.
Thanks, appreciate it. Any other discussion of the school presentation? Thank you, Dave. Lee, do you want to introduce them?
Thanks. And we've got a brief presentation to help launch this. There's that one. And open this one. So this is a format you've seen before. I'll again thank Joe Colangelo for the basic structure and format of this. Thought it would be helpful to keep that consistent. And again, thank Peter Frankenberg for an awful lot of work in the background, helping to do calculations and all sorts of other important materials. So a quick overview of the budget process. You're all familiar with this. We started summer, fall, looking at the capital plan, moving up through department head and committee proposals. We had an informal meeting. We've now have this hearing, and eventually we'll go to town meeting vote on the budget, and hopefully that is approved and we launch that new budget on July 1. So a few highlights of the current draft of the budget based on our last week's meeting. Total expenditures would rise roughly $700,000 by 8%. Total anticipated revenues also rise by roughly 8%. And those balance out thanks to some modest growth in the grand list. So the current budget, based on the select board's proposals, would represent a 4.98% increase in the actual tax rate, just under your proposed 5% maximum target. Major drivers, no surprise, they're really the same as last year. We still have some old debt, for example, renovation on this building that will retire several years out. We have new debt we voted to assume as a community. We have collective bargaining agreements that have fixed costs built into those. But again, we were fortunate in at least seeing some moderate growth in the grand list this year. So this is a quick look at what those dollars actually mean. Current fiscal year, next year projected, and again, apologies for this. We got to fix this. malware bytes thing that, yeah. So net change total, $166 is what we're projecting right now. The significant expenditures, significant drivers from the budget perspective, this isn't intended to be critical of any of these departments, it's just a fact of life. Police department representing the highest percentage. Second is highway for clear reasons, heavy equipment and paving and those materials are very expensive. Debt service, and then several other of the key departments that simply cost money to run and operate to provide those services to the municipality. So taking rescue out of the equation, because as we discussed last week, their budget is essentially self-funded through insurance billings. We're looking at roughly $8.8 million in actual expenditures. If you break that out on a per $100,000 amount, here's what it looks like to fund each of those major departments. Again, rescue showing up as zero because they're self-funded offline from tax revenues. As you know, there was a prior agreement to start decreasing the amount of cell tower revenue that accrued to the town. This year is when it comes to an end, and where that money goes is it goes to the Water Commission since they are hosting that infrastructure on the south tank. Long-term debt, as we know, is in the short term rising due to debt we have voted to assume. Several years out, that will start to decrease. FY 22-23 when we retire the bond for this building, for example. But, you know, we have capital projects, we've agreed to fund those, and they're all important, and it does create hardship. After the Select Board's meeting last week and Peter sharpened his pencil, we spent a lot of time talking through these things, looked at some possibilities. We are recommending some adjustments to the budget as discussed last week. And very briefly, we are suggesting that we restore cuts made to police department overtime and dispatch overtime, primarily because those are mission critical services that require certain levels of staffing. You know, the practical reality is if I as town manager am out sick for a day, the town goes on. If a dispatcher has to call in sick, a police officer has to call in sick, somebody has to fill that position. Somebody has to work on legal holidays. So we're concerned about trying to cut those areas that fundamentally have to be paid for. We are proposing restoration of that $7,500 that the board suggested cutting from the capital fund for the non-lethal equipment. As I understand it, that would fund one set of whatever those materials and equipments are. It's not like we were going to buy 5 of something, so let's buy 2 this year and 2 next year.
So
and again,
does that bring that to 15?
Brings it back to 15 if these suggestions are accepted. And again, the reason, as we discussed, that we feel this is important is one, for protection of officers, protection of persons who are the subject of difficult behavior, shall we say, and protection against liability should a more severe incident occur because we didn't have those tools available. Fire department is proposing to entirely delete the daytime station coverage stipend for next year. That was originally $12,500. My budget proposed cutting it to $5,000 on the premise that it hasn't taken off quite as we had hoped. The officers have chosen to just delete it entirely. Any members who choose to work daytime coverage, that'll get wrapped into the normal stipend line item that already exists for calls, trainings, and other events. Proposing to add the $1,500 back in to do the backboard at Davis Park. Apparently not too long ago, we spent significant money to resurface the tennis courts. This is something you can't buy half of, and we resurfaced the courts. This is kind of the last piece of making those courts more functional. Again, we don't do this lightly, suggesting to put back items that the board has said, please take out, but we'll explain our rationale at the end. Town clerk, we're proposing a parity pay adjustment for the 2 assistant clerks. I think that may be the subject of other discussion as we move forward this evening. Dispatch contract revenues are proposed to rise. There was not much of an increase last year. We are working with our partner agencies to move toward more of a fixed cost approach to budgeting. It will be helpful, we believe, for them for budgeting, helpful for us in having revenue we can count on. There's never a perfectly predictable number of calls that any other agency creates, but the reality is the numbers seem to be fairly stable over time. And if the town of Lincoln provides 10 calls for service one year instead of 12, or 8 instead of 10 or 12, it doesn't change how many dispatchers we need on duty. The lights still have to be on. The building needs to be heated. We had some significant conversations with one of our biggest partners, town of Heinsberg, and they were very concerned over the unpredictability of budgeting. And they were very concerned about having a predictable number. It wasn't, of course it was important what that number was, but it wasn't as important as having a fixed number. So in negotiations, we came up with a number they were satisfied with. It certainly serves our purpose as well, and we're both happy. So we're thinking of moving toward that for all parties. Total adjustments, including these proposed adds, the increase in dispatch revenue, the cut in the fire department stipend, conservative approach to the grand list, actually brings the proposed total budget down minutely to 4.93% increase. So tonight we're having the public hearing, which could conclude or may well continue to next week's meeting. We'll presumably warn the town meeting warning next week or immediately thereafter. Town meeting votes, March 4 and 5, and again, budget becoming effective on July 1.
Thank you, Lee.
That's the background. Thank you all.
Any discussion? Josh?
I guess the only thing I would ask is that I understand the discussion about overtime, but I think it might be worthwhile to sort of visit the amount of overtime and whether there may be mechanisms either by additional full or part-time staff to manage overtime in police and dispatch in a less expensive manner, because obviously overtime is expensive, but it's just something that you might want to think about.
Important points, and just by way of information, my understanding is that the chief and his command staff every week are actually looking at those very issues. I've been informed that several of the officers and command staff have actually agreed to change their working schedules so that they're filling or backfilling shifts with straight time service instead of overtime. So they really are looking at that very hard.
That's great.
And regularly.
Good, good.
Thanks, Josh. Colleen?
Just a response. I think we had talked about this before about the overtime in police specifically, but there's a balance between that and hiring more staff, because more staff means more benefits, and that tends to be our most expensive expenditure. And at least with overtime, if we don't need it, we don't use it.
Well, I think Lee's statement about how they're trying to deal with that seems like a much better approach.
Yep. Another option we hope will be helpful, we'll find out as it progresses, is by hiring the school resource officer who will clearly work during the school year. That person will then be available for us, again, to fill shifts, to backfill as much as possible on straight time. So again, it's another strategy that we hope will be helpful.
Thank you. Mary?
At the risk of really looking dense, I haven't studied this as much as I'd like. We have the memo from you and Peter talking about the changes that we suggested at the last meeting, which made it such that, as it happens, we got an increase in the tax rate to 4.98%. As I read what you had on the board and what is in these other additional, which is also reflected on this little memo, you got us to 4.93% tax increase. What I'm not following is the math, because just from a general point of view, you were adding back in and adding back in. So what am I missing that with these add-ins, you actually brought the tax rate increase further down? Is it the 26,000 or so that came from another source, or?
No, it's a very fair question. And just to be clear, the draft budget that we distributed to you and that's available for folks and has been online is the budget that you, as a board, asked for last week. We did not bake into those yet the proposed changes that we've made, because that's not where you are yet. Peter, can you help clarify that? Because yes, we did
How does it
propose
go
the additional
down, though?
revenue on dispatch, a slight decrease thanks to
Okay,
the
is
fire
it-
department, but it doesn't.
Yeah, right. So is that the
quite
reason why
add up.
it goes down, even though there's so many add-ins?
Yeah, there was a revenue source, the dispatch revenue that we talked
That's it,
about
that's what I
earlier.
figured.
We took on, or the department, give them credit, have been out looking for agencies that we could provide dispatching services for. We already take 911 calls, the state pays us for that. But the agencies that we dispatch for are several dozen now. And picking up Grand Isle County has a number of agencies up there. That increased our calls that we answer by about 1,300 calls a year, and we charge so much per call. So that really, that line item has been growing as a result of that. Was under budgeted, in fact, this year. So that would be the main revenue source that came in that we looked, and further evaluation that did offset those other expenditures that we looked at before. So that would be in the budget regardless of whether you change
Sure,
the expenses
sure.
or not. That's,
Right.
we're pretty certain that's a good number now.
Thank you.
Okay.
No big comments. I definitely support adding back the less than lethal dollars there. I think that was a smart investment for us, and I'm sure it will pay off down the road. Generally agree with the fine tuning that you've done over the last week. I don't really have any objections to the puts and takes there that you're suggesting.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's a nice piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, it accomplished what we asked you to do, so congratulations on that.
Yeah, well done.
Team effort.
Yeah,
Wasn't
well done,
easy.
Peter. Now, are there questions from the public? Comments? Tom?
Tom Tompkins, Falls Road. Now that we're down to 4.93%, there might be room for you to reinstate your stipends. I'm a little, I appreciate the fact that you're willing to do this purely on a volunteer basis. However, I see that serving on the select board has become more and more time-consuming and difficult over the years. And I would worry that not receiving a stipend might dissuade folks from wanting to serve. The other possibility that one could encounter is a case where those who run for a seat on the board have an agenda. And so I would be happy if you got your stipends back, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, there seemed to be one benefit to that cut, Tom, and that was the next time we're asked, how much do you actually get paid per hour? Which is always a difficult mathematical problem, and by hundredths of cents. This could be simple, nothing. I appreciate the sentiment. I think on the other side, some or all of us feel pretty strongly that we're our own best example of economies, and it's a year, as it will next year be, with the great demand of pressures on tax pressures, and but we appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah, and it may not be a long-term thing. I mean, once our debt sort of settles down a little bit, it may be a reasonable thing to do. to reinstate.
Thank you. Any other comments? Again, I think this was a masterful job. No, in a fairly compressed period of time, we all recognize with the holidays, your first outing, to say the least.
Indeed.
And it's a source of great assurance and respect that all the while, after we go home, you're still at work at it and produce this kind of a proposal. Any other comments on the part of anybody?
I would like to just reconfirm some of the line items that we've identified for traffic safety.
That's a good idea.
I know I see page 8, line 50. So we're taking that down 10K, right?
Yes, from 20 to 10.
Yep. And that, Lee, can you refresh our memory on what we're not doing by sacrificing those
Which
dollars? I'm on line 50.
I think it was Bay Road.
The Bay Road.
So
Was there a
It's
study?
a separate.
There were two separate line items. There was a separate line item for the so-called Bay Road corridor study to implement some changes, but there isn't really a set of changes identified to make. We did keep 10,000 in that area for the gravel path that has been discussed for several years, from the fishing access to the Bay Park access. And then my understanding was the village bike ped safety group had sought 10,000 again next year for various traffic safety improvements in the village, and that was kept. I'm not really sure where that started at 20,000, to be quite honest.
Jane's here, do you have any thoughts on, does your committee feel good about the 10? I know you obviously were okay with it, but are there things that we should be doing, and if you had an additional 10K?
Well, my understanding is last year there was 20,000 that was kind of lumped together for both bike paths and our group requests. And when I looked over, it looks like they had gotten separated, so that other 10 went elsewhere. So it actually is better delineated in my mind.
As far as knowing that you're going to get something.
Yeah, that the 10,000 we requested is in there under the highway
Right.
department, and the other 10 is in.
The bike, yeah,
Yeah.
that was for the Irish
So
Home.
right.
that was my
Yeah.
understanding
No,
what
that's-
happened. So we didn't, nobody lost anything, it just got
Got changed, that's right. That's where that
distributed in
happened.
different spots.
Plus, we added some for striping, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Right, but I guess, are there projects on our, I guess, wish list? I know we've heard about a few, and we've all had conversations that, in your mind or the committee's mind, we should be doing, and if we have an opportunity to sort of pull back in some dollars here, if there's appetite on the board to do that.
Well, we could always come up with some projects.
But do you think, yeah, I mean, do you think we should? Are there projects that,
It's hard for me to answer that at the
Right.
moment because we were trying to be reasonable in our requests for this next year. You know, I think it would be a good year to try to align some of the initiatives that, you know, with the new town plan, and take a look at a more comprehensive look around complete streets philosophy. So rather than kind of nickel and diming things, which was what we've been doing the previous years, really do some real comprehensive planning for the future.
You sort of
Thank
had
you.
that, Jane, didn't you? And you gave us a presentation that I'm going to find that was sort of tiered, right?
For this budget year, for the budget year for.
I'm just trying to
1920?
find the presentation you gave us when we had our day-long meeting, and it seemed to me that you had.
Right, we
it's
did
right
some
here.
visionary planning in that, yes, you're right, in that plan. And to look at in terms of future.
And the 10,000 was additional radar sensor display.
Yeah.
Three-way stop at Church and Falls, which is great. Designated 4-foot bike lane from the intersection of Falls and Marset North along Upper Falls Road. And pilot rumble strips. Those last two being unknown, but I think it does give you plenty of money, plenty for those goals. At least I would hope so.
Right.
Thanks, Jane. Any other questions, comments? Is there a motion to close the public hearing? Josh, are you gonna?
I'm wondering if we may need to continue the hearing to next week rather than close it at this time, given
Okay.
that we may still have
Yeah.
another item to
Sure.
discuss.
So
Okay.
move to continue the public hearing until the next select board meeting.
And a
Second.
second? Jamie
Second.
seconds. Any further discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, and thank you again,
Peter.
Lee and Peter. Thanks, Peter. The next item on our agenda is an executive session. As is our custom, there are two motions regarding executive sessions.
I would move then, Mr. Chair, to find that premature public knowledge regarding the negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And the second motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd move to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313 to discuss negotiating or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, and to invite the finance director, the town manager, fire chiefs, rescue chief, and I think that's it.
Town attorney.
Oh, is he here?
We'll be calling in.
Okay, and the town attorney into the executive session.
David White.
I thought we,
Oh, is David going to be here for that?
And David White will
I'm
be
sorry.
as well.
I thought we were going to have David White and the town attorney,
So did I.
yourself and Lee,
Yeah.
and Peter.
Yes,
That would be
this-
my preference, for
And
sure.
not anyone from
No,
rescue or fire?
not the service chiefs.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Sorry.
conversation happened subsequent to my drafting of
Oh,
this.
all right.
So
Would you be willing to,
Amend? Yes, of
Apologize.
course. So, would you like me to restate it, or does everybody have it?
I think we got it.
might be helpful?
second
We're
it.
talking about David White. Mr. White, is he, I
he
don't know
will
whether
be here
he's,
shortly. We're actually a little ahead of schedule, remarkably, but he is anticipated shortly.
and he will be joined by the town attorney on the phone and the finance director and town manager. Is that acceptable for everybody?
Yes. We had
Yeah, I
we got a
second
second.
There's a second from Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We will be back definitely, I would say, the most of half an hour, probably. Thank you. Close the executive session and resume general session.
So moved.
Jamie moves, Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are going to continue to pursue a real estate initiative, and we'll resume, we'll be back on Tuesday, next Tuesday night, with further discussion of that. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Colleen moves, Jamie seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you
Thanks,
both.
everyone.
Thanks, Maddie.